Welcome to Godcast with Wanda. Today we're going to be studying about Noah and his 3 sons. We're going to start out in Genesis 7. So if you have your Bibles, it's the first book of the Bible, chapter 7, Genesis. So remember we went through good son, bad son. Cain was on the bad son side. Abel was on the good son side, and then Cain killed Abel, so it went to Seth. Seth is the first one who prayed to God. And then we go down the line of Seth. The chapters describe the descendants of Shem. And then comes Noah. God is so mad with the world, so angry with the world, that he wants to destroy it through a flood. And so he finds Noah being righteous to the Lord, the only righteous family there is on the earth. He has him build an ark. This ark takes 120 years to build. So he builds the ark, and then it's time to get all the animals. 7, you've heard this, 2 by 2 animals, and then some doves and some sacrificial animals in a group of 7. So he gets everyone on the ark, and then he shuts the door. God shuts the door to the ark. Well, we're going to start in Genesis 7, and I want to point something out to you right here to begin with. That the flood is going to last 40 days. In verse number 4, it says, "For after 7 more days, I will cause rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights." Now, the number 40, if you're keeping track of symbolic meanings, now there are numbers are symbolic also. The number 40 is a time of testing. Remember, Jesus got baptized, and then he went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, a time of testing. He didn't eat, he didn't drink during those 40 days. He was alone, and he was being tested, just like you and I are tested all the time. Also, 40 years. The Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years, the wilderness for 40 years, a time of testing to get their hearts right, to get them worshiping God, to get them back on the right path. So 40 is a time of testing. So again, it mentions down in verse 12, "And the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights." Now let's look at verse 11. It says, "In the 600th year of Noah's life." So he's 600 years old when he gets in this ark. "In the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, and on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up." So what happened is, up until this time, there had never been rain on the earth. Everything came up from the springs of the ground, from the dew on the ground, but there was no such thing as rain. They didn't even know what rain was. He built an ark on dry land, and they made fun of him. They didn't even know what rain was. So Noah trusted in God. He listened to him. He built an ark according to God's specifications. And when the time came, Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. So there are 8 people on this ark. If we go to verse 24, it says, "And the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days, which means that it didn't rain during this time, but it stayed like an ocean, like a lake, like, just they were floating around on the water. Then if we look down into chapter 8, verse 13, it says, "And it came to pass in the 600th year," now this is how old Noah would be, 601st year, so he's been there 1 year. They're out on the ark for 370 days. So this is where it says that in verse 13. Let's read on down. "And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month, and the 1st day of the month." So they give you dates. There are people who study the dates and the times, and they can give you exact days when things happen. And this is why God puts days and months and years in here. It says, "And the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And in the 2nd month of the 600th year, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried." Okay, now if we look down, Noah and his family get off of the ark, and he does sacrifices to God, and he worships God. But let's turn on over to chapter 8, verse 18. Now they've been on the earth for a while. Noah is near the end of his life. So it says that Noah lived 350 years after the flood. So we know that, and I'm going to read that to you in just a minute here. So we're getting towards the end of his life, but something happens here. And this is very important because throughout the Bible and even through Hebrew history, the firstborn son receives a blessing. And it's usually 2/3 of the inheritance. He carries on the name, he gets the money, whatever. But he gets the blessing of the firstborn. So listen to this. And I'm in chapter 8, verse 18. Now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now it's always listed like this, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So it would make you think that Shem is the oldest son, but he's not. We're going to read that in just a minute. And Ham was the father of Canaan. So Ham already has kids. Shem already has kids. Japheth already has kids. They've already populated the earth, or the area that they're in. It says, these three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. Now Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he got drunk on wine, and he became uncovered in his tent. All right, in verse 22, listen to this now. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, they put it on their back, and then went backwards into the tent, and they laid it and covered their father up. So they took care of that. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. Okay, so let's read on, because this is where it gets real important. So Noah awoke from his wine and knew that his younger son had done this to him. He knew what he'd done. And the younger son, who was it that saw him naked? Ham. So now we have one clue. Ham is the younger son. So keep that in mind. So what does he do? Now, when Noah gets close to death, or he knows he's old in age, he's got to turn over the line. He gives a blessing. This happens all through the Bible, and the older son usually gets the blessing. But this time, it's not going to be the older son that gets the blessing. Ham is the younger son, and this is what he says. It says, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, and he shall be to his brethren. And he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. So Shem is getting the blessing here. And may Canaan be his servant. And may God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. So in other words, he's put Shem over his two brothers. Now remember, these were the only three families on the earth at the time, the Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now we know Ham is the younger son. So who is the older son? And we're going to fast forward here. If you look at chapter 10, verse 21, and the children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the son of Japheth, the older. So this would be the way it would go. Japheth would be the oldest, Shem would be the middle son, and Ham is the younger son. So Japheth should have gotten the blessing, but it didn't go to Japheth. It's up to the father who he gives the blessing to. Normally it is the firstborn, but in this case it's not, it's the secondborn. So Shem gets the blessing, which means he's going to carry on the line of Jesus, the line of David, and Israel will become a nation out of them. Now a word was mentioned here back in 21. It says, and the children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber. Now in some Bibles, this is spelled H-E-B-E-R. This is where the Hebrew name comes from Eber. He had two sons, Peleg and Joktan. They were twins, and Peleg carries on the line here. So let's go back into chapter 9, verse 28, and then we're going to end the chapter there. It says, and Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So now Noah has blessed his son, Shem. He is going to carry on the name. He's going to carry on the family heritage. And he has cursed his son Ham. Now this is big here. Now if you remember, I talked about good son, bad son. And also chapter 3, Genesis chapter 3:15, enmity. I'm going to put enmity between your seed and her seed. Good son, bad son. Let's talk about this some more. Now chapter 10 is going to go on and it's going to talk about this is called the Table of Nations. These are the nations that come out of these three sons. Table of Nations. Now I'm not going to bore you with all of these, not bore you. The names really at this time don't mean anything. I'm just going to point out the ones that you really need to know. Excuse me. All right. So verse 1. It says, now this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The sons were born to them after the flood. Now, it's fixing to list all of the sons that were born to them after they got out of the flood, they built a city, they started populating. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. I am going to go through some. And you're going to see these again, these names right here. Look at verse 2. It says, the sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, and fast forward, Tubal, Meshach, verse 3, Gomer again. These are the names you're going to see in Ezekiel 38 with the war of Gog and Magog. Now this is prophecy, Gog and Magog. Hasn't happened yet. In fact, it might be happening now or starting to build up now as we see in Israel and in the Middle East. These names, you will see what lands they relate to now, what countries they relate to now that are surrounding Israel. And they're coming to life right now. So these names are very important, very important. Remember those. And go on to verse 5 now, verse 5. I want to point something out to you. It says, from these coastlands, the peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, their families, according to their own language. Now, what does that mean? Now, the Bible is not always in chronological sequence. Sometimes you'll have a chapter that comes in and explains something before it happens. This is what's happened here. Now, if I were to put this in chronology, chapter 11 would go before chapter 10. So this has already happened. They are already speaking different languages. They've already dispersed into all of their lands. And when we get to Babel, we'll talk about that. But the Bible is not always in sequential order. And this is one of those times that it's not in sequential order. Okay? So they've already got their own language, and you're going to see the other sons have their own language. All right, then verse 6, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim. That's Egypt. We're going to see that again all through the Bible. Put and Canaan. Now Canaan, let me explain Canaan. You have a map of Israel. All of Israel is considered Canaan, okay? That's like we live in the United States, but I might live in Georgia. We're breaking it down. Now the United States would be equal to Canaan. Georgia would be equal to maybe the land of Judah, took over when the Israelites went in. And then to break it down even further, you have Atlanta, Jerusalem. So it starts out as Canaan, and then when the Israelites go into captivity in Egypt, or not into slavery really, in Egypt, they're going to come out as Israelites into the promised land, into the land of Canaan that God has given them. So keep that in mind, okay? And that comes from Ham. Remember, that land is cursed. They have a different language, and they have their own families. All right, now let's go on down to verse 8. It says, Cush begat Nimrod. He became a mighty man on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Now, Nimrod was not a hunter of animals. He was a hunter of men. He was a very, very evil king, He created and built Babylon. This is where Babylon is mentioned second to Jerusalem in the Bible the most times. So we have Jerusalem mentioned the most times, then Babylon is mentioned the most time. Why is that? Because Babel is where pagan religions started, okay? And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. Okay, so let's go on down to verse 20. We're in chapter 10, verse 20. It says, these were the sons of Ham according to their families, according to their language. They have a different language, their own language, in their lands and in their nation. So they've already been separated when God disperses the lands when we read in chapter 11. Okay? So, and then we just read about the children of Shem. It says, these were the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages. So once again, their lands and according to their nation. So everyone had their own language, their own land, their own nation. Okay? So now we get to the Tower of Babel, 11. Now this is where pagan religion begins. Now let's read this, starting with verse 1. It says, now the whole earth had one language and one speech. So that tells you right there that this happened before chapter 10. It's not in order. One language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, and they found a plain in the land of Shinar. Now Shinar is also Babylon's area around Babylon. And they dwelt there. And then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar, and they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Now, Josephus tells us a little bit more about this story. Josephus tells us that Nimrod was a mighty king over all these people. And he had convinced them that if we don't build this mighty tower to heaven, God is going to destroy us again by the flood. And if we build this tower and he floods the earth again, we'll be safe. So the people agreed. They couldn't build it fast enough. Could not build it fast enough. So Nimrod scared them into building this big tower going to heaven. And that's where we'll pick up here. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they have one language, and this is what they will begin to do. Now nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from all over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the earth, and from the Lord they scattered abroad all over the earth. So here we have Nimrod, a mighty king. He had a mighty nation all over Mesopotamia. And he ruled, and he hunted men. Remember that now. He had an army. He hunted men. And he put them into slavery to build this tower to heaven, thinking he could be more powerful than God. Now, I'm not going to go into it right now, but if you want to study a little bit more about this and you want to learn about the pagan religion that started from this, study Semiramis and Tammuz. Goes all into this. It's just something to further study and to watch into. So I hope you got something out of today's lesson, that the nations were spread, how the languages were confused, how we have different languages in different parts of the land. And I just pray, that you will share the word, share the gospel. Let's get the word out there because time is short. I can't hardly wait to get to some prophecy so we can talk about what's happening in Israel today. It's exciting. And God says, do not be afraid. Tells us that so many times, I think over 350 times in the Bible. Do not be afraid, because we know as believers, we know what's going to happen. God is going to save us. He's going to save us from the wrath, not through the wrath. So please share this gospel and share the word. Share that Jesus loves you no matter what.